Welcome back to the Bear Talk Podcast. We are back with another episode of Let's Talk About It, and we're continuing our series. We're doing a deep dive into every single NBA team before this upcoming season. This episode, we're going to be focusing on the Chicago Bulls, but before we get into that, make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, helps the channel out a ton. But going into the Chicago Bulls, this offseason, very active for what they were able to do. I'm not a big fan of the Josh Giddey and Alex Caruso trade for what the Bulls kind of got in that trade. But they were in a situation where they saw Josh Giddey at a buy low price for what he did the past couple season off the court and on the court. So they were looking at this as a buy low situation. We could be thinking of this of a great trade with how Josh Giddey plays this upcoming year. That's the only questionable move that they made. I'm glad they didn't bring back DeMar DeRozan. I think that time has passed with him in Chicago. They were not able to find a Zach LaVine trade because I think his value is just a little bit too low coming off of the injury with the contract and everything else like that. I think they're going to be fine with bringing him back with him around more playmaking guys. I think Zach LaVine could have a really, really good bounce back year to get that trade value up for them to move him at this year's deadline. I think that Kobe White's development is going to be huge this year again compared to last year with what he was able to do. And I do think it's interesting because that came with Zach LaVine being out of the lineup, so it's interesting to see how the both of them coexist, being two guys that are more so score first. But getting into the offseason moves, you obviously trade for Josh Giddey, you draft Montes Buzelos, who I think has a world of potential, and I think this gives you the avenue to move off of somebody like a Patrick Williams if need be. Looking at somebody like a Zach LaVine, you weren't able to move him, but I think that's fine on the roster. Offseason moves, you also got Chris Duarte in a kind of trade from Sacramento to the Chicago Bulls. But going into more so where the bulk of this is going to be is in the starting five. I have Josh Giddey at the 1. I think you don't trade for somebody like him giving up an Alex Caruso level piece and not start him. I think you bring in Josh Giddey, he's year 1. I think you go Kobe White at year 2. I think you go Zach LaVine at year 3, Patrick Williams at year 4, Nikola Vucevic at year 5. Very, very interesting lineup that they do have here. I'm just going to pull up the Chicago Bulls roster real quick. Looking at what they do have to get the roster down as a whole. They do have kind of a mixed bag on this roster. I think at this year's deadline that they're going to definitely be able to kind of sell off a lot of these pieces because I think they're kind of somewhat in a rebuild, but somewhat not, because I still do think this Bulls team has the scoring power to really be a good, solid, middle-of-the-pack team out east with Kobe White and his development and Zach LaVine, and you still have Nikola Vucevic. But I do think the writing is on the wall. I think the team at the deadline is going to look to sell off a lot of these pieces that they do have because they have a lot of pieces that contending teams are going to want. Looking at what they do have to move, and this is kind of going more into my expectations of the Chicago Bulls and what I think they're going to be able to do with this team. I think they need to focus on the development. I'm, from a Chicago Bulls point of view, not really worried about my wins and losses. We're looking on the purely development of my guys and how they are going to be looking at how the outlook looks going into next season. But this season, we're focused on complete player development and Montes Buzelos, trying to get Josh Giddey back on the right track. Seeing what we still have out of Lonzo Ball. Him coming off of injury, reports are saying that he's going to be a ready-to-go player for the season opener that they do have. We're still looking to get Zach LaVine's trade value back up. So anything that revolves around either player development or getting a guy's trade value up for the trade deadline to move them, I think should be in the best interest of Chicago. I think Ayo Dosunmu still have some more development. I think he's a possible player where I love if they keep him because I think he fits what they do there in Chicago. But if there's a trade to have to move him, I think it could be at the deadline. But looking at this, I think there's 4 players that they need to really prioritize, kind of getting their value up as high as possible to move them. I think Lonzo Ball is one of them. If Lonzo Ball is healthy, you already bring in Josh Giddey. You already have Kobe White. That seems to be, as of right now, the backcourt of the future, right? Seems to be that on paper right now. So where does Lonzo Ball? He's kind of an odd man out in this situation. He's making $21 million. I wanted to say this is the last year of that contract as well. So an expiring contract, $21 million is not crazy hard to move in today's NBA. And if he gets his value up high enough, a nice 3-and-D guard could be very enticing for contending teams. I could definitely see a lot of teams calling about the availability of Lonzo Ball around there in contending markets, because I think Lonzo Ball, if he gets his value up, is still, even if the athleticism isn't all the way there, he's still going to be a solid enough defender. He's still going to be a high IQ playmaking guard that can hit the three ball at a high clip now, with what he's done in the league and what we've seen from him. So looking at that, if he's able to show that he can be healthy up until the deadline, I think that he is somebody that contending teams are going to be picking up the phone for. Another guy, Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine, I think, is going to be having a monster year. I think he's heard a lot of the talks about his trade value and how teams view him in the league. And I think a lot of teams are going to regret not going and trading for Zach LaVine, even though the contract is large. I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are regretting not going after and getting somebody like a Zach LaVine with the season I think he's going to have. And I think the Chicago Bulls are going to kind of be looked at as smart in this way for holding on to Zach LaVine, because I think they know what they have. I think they just are waiting for that trade value to get back up so they can make the right move for the team. And I think they're going to net a pretty solid return for Zach LaVine once he gets that value up, because I think Zach LaVine is that good of a player. So I think Zach LaVine is somebody that is going to get that value up and really show why he is worth that contract. Another player on the low-key side of things, I think Chris Duarte could be a nice little throw-in in a trade with like a Zach LaVine or Alonzo Ball. He's making up about $6 million a year. He's on the older side of that guard position, but he's somebody that can just be a depth piece for a lot of teams out there. He can kind of be in a throw-in piece for either one of a Zach LaVine trade or Alonzo Ball trade, because he kind of got a throw-in deal to go to Chicago. So I think they are really going to be content if they kind of move off of him and kind of a two-player deal to go get what they really want. And then the last piece, which is always in me going on just trade machines and everything else, trying to find a trade for Nikola Vucevic, it's always kind of the hardest thing, because with his play style, it's like really he's kind of forming to where if he does get traded, I feel like he's going to be more of a backup big in certain situations, but his floor spacing ability is so enticing for teams, I feel like, to where like there is always going to be a market for that big that can space the floor. I'm very shocked to see that I haven't seen like a New Orleans Pelicans connection because of his ability to space and the connection with Zion Williamson. I think that's kind of the big mold that they've reportedly been looking for, and they still don't even have a center really going into the year. Their main center is Daniel Tice and Yves Missi, so it's going to be very interesting to see what route they go. I think Nikola Vucevic, his value is kind of what it is, but I do definitely think he has a movable contract. It's $20 million for a big that can stretch the floor. He's on the older side of it, so you're not really crazy about him being your franchise starting center anymore. Like, he's somebody that I feel like you're comfortable with if in a situational like the Pelicans, where like you're fine with him kind of coming off the bench depending on the development of Yves Missi, but his floor spacing ability is going to always kind of leave that back door open for his market being maybe wider than what it maybe should be because of his spacing ability, right? So I think those four guys are definitely guys the Chicago Bulls should really look to move at this year's deadline. If they can get a good return for Zach LaVine, I think Alonzo Ball and what he can provide you can give you a good enough return to maybe move him. And Nikola Vucevic, I think they're going to be getting enough assets and capital to be going into the future with a better mindset and direction of what they're doing. Because right now they're a bit of a mixed bag. They're kind of mid-tier in the position of where they're looking to fully blow it up in a rebuild, but they're waiting to get it the best return on some of their assets and what they do have in Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic. So I do think they're going to be looked at as smart for kind of staying pat and not moving these guys this offseason. But in terms of the main question, what does Alonzo Ball look like with so much time off the court? I think Alonzo Ball, this is a great thing to see him back playing. He said he basically has a whole new knee. So it's going to be interesting to see what version of Lonzo Ball we do get. If it's any, I think if it's 70% of Lonzo Ball, we love to see that from what he once was. I think the athleticism is going to take a little bit step back, but I think the defense is still going to be there for the most part. I think the high IQ and the playmaking is obviously going to be there. So now he's going to really have to rely more on his three-point shooting, which he has gotten better at throughout his NBA career, which I think is going to make him a valuable trade target piece at this year's deadline because he seems like the odd man out. And if they can get his value up, they can flip him for some draft capital. I feel like they're going to be in a very good spot moving forward, especially if he can be anywhere like where he was once he got hurt in the first place. But that's really all I have for the Chicago Bulls in this deep dive, kind of more so them pivoting and kind of navigating through this rebuild process and figuring out what they want to do going forward. I think they still have a lot of pieces and avenues to getting even more assets and draft capital, but it's going to be very interesting to see how they navigate through this process going forward. But that's all I have for Chicago Bulls. Thank you guys for tuning into the Barrel Talk podcast. Hope to see you tune in to future episodes.